Corinthians chapter 13, I want you to think about what is the most powerful attribute of God. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, When you think about all the attributes of God, what's the most powerful attribute that there is? And it's kind of hard to say that this is the most powerful attribute of God because everything God is complete. Everything that God does is perfect. So when you think about what is the most powerful attribute of God, I would dare to say it's love. And as we look at our text this evening, we're looking at 1 Corinthians chapter 13, and we're looking at the power of love in a church. And of course, I hope we all understand that the power of, or the love of the church is not our ability to muster up this love. It is the love of God shining out through us. And when you're a child of God, you have the love of God. It is the fruit of one of the fruits of the Spirit. It is what Jesus said, if you are mine, they will know you by your love. And who are they that he's speaking of? Everybody. The world will know you by your love. Why is that? Because when you're in a dark world, the light of love shines a long ways. You think about when the power goes out, and thankfully we didn't have to deal with that in the last few days. But when you think about when the power's out, the street lights are out, and you light a candle, on how much brighter it gets. We need to be able to show the power of God's love. And as we read here in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, it says, though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not charity, I am become as sounding brass or as tingling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I can remove mountains and have not charity, I'm nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing. Charity suffereth long and is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself, and is not puffed up. Doth not behave itself unseemingly, not her own, or seeketh not her own. Is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil, rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth. Beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. Charity never faileth. But whether there be prophecies, they shall fail. Whether there be tongues, they shall cease. Whether there be knowledge, it shall vanish away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away. When I was a child, I spake as a child, and I understood as a child, and I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as I am known. And now abideth faith, hope, charity. These three, and the greatest of these is charity. When Laura and I, when we lived in Kentucky, we liked to go on hikes. And to keep the kids interested, we usually found hikes that were near water. So we would go hiking near creeks or near springs or near rivers, and we loved to find waterfalls. If the kids, we were going to go for a hike somewhere, the kids were going to go, they would usually ask, is there a waterfall? Can we get in it? And so we would go to these waterfalls, and we would go to these different places, and just some magnificent waterfalls there in Kentucky, beautiful scenery that they had over there. But there was one property that we went to, and I think me and Laura went by ourselves this time. We had somebody kept the kids, and we had an opportunity to go by ourselves. And we went to this one place. That it was a kind of a place from even back in the early time of the United States, even before they were the United States. They had this place where the water would flow, and they had that wheel, and they would grind their corn by the power of that. And so we went and walked around this lake, which was probably at that time would have been a river. And as we were walking through there, someone said, if you go over here, there's this awesome waterfall. And so we went and walking through where they told us to go, and I'm pretty sure we were trespassing on somebody else's land while we were getting to this waterfall, because nobody ever said anything about it. But as we got closer to it, man, you could start hearing the noise off of it. So we climbed through the trees, and we got on top of the hill, and this waterfall, I don't know if it was 50, 60 feet down as it was coming over. And I could remember as I was sitting there looking at that waterfall and just the noise, it made me think of Revelation chapter 14, talking about the voice of God. It says, and I heard the voice of heaven as the voice of many waters. The sound coming off that waterfall made me think of the voice of God, as it was so powerful that not only could you hear it, you could feel it. And as I was thinking about that and dwelling on that this week and looking over this sermon, it made me think of God's creation and the power of God's creation. And we've seen, not too bad this week, but we've seen the power of the wind. And you think about, you read about in the Old Testament whenever there would be hailstone come down and will wipe out an army. And I think we've seen a picture of someone over in the Sullivan area that had like baseball-sized hail just yesterday. You know, you get enough of that, you can take an army out pretty quick. But you think about the power of God's creation, and this in February, Laura and I, we got to go out to Washington and Washington State and climb one of those mountains and just stand there and just in the beauty of all of God's creation, the power of God. But think about this, all God had to do to make this world was say, let there be light. Let the waters be separated. Let there be trees and herbs and things come up. Just by the speaking of His voice, all these things come into play. But when you think about this, of all of the power that God had in His creation, it didn't bring Him to walk on this earth. And you think about the intelligence of His creation, the planets. You think about the planets, and Dan's not here tonight, but I think about Dan and all the things that he's got to figure out to make sure that he's more on the defense side of things. But I'm thinking about those astronauts. How do you get to the moon? You can't get there from here. You've got to shoot at an angle and kind of get there. And I don't know how, I'm probably completely wrong on that. But the complexity of, you think about this, of the earth has been spinning around and around as it's spinning around the sun. And it's been doing that ever since God created. And the other planets, just the dynamic way everything works, the intelligence that God has to make everything work. The sun has not burned out. We have all the energy we need. The plants are growing. The cows are eating. Life is going on this earth, and we're still just barely scraping the surface on how intelligent God is. But yet the intelligence of God's creation did not bring Him to plan that Jesus would come to this earth and to walk among us. And even as you think about the holiness and the justice of God, it did not stop Him from giving mercy and giving grace to people who don't deserve it. But love did. Love put Him on the earth. Love put Him in the poorest place that it could be. As He was born in Bethlehem, to a family that didn't even have a roof to put him under. He walked upon this earth in poverty. He walked in his ministry. He didn't have a roof to sleep in or a roof to put over his head. The people that were wanting to come and follow him, they would say, "Where do you live? Where do you stay?" He says, "Wherever. We're just walking and preaching, and whoever lets me stay there." This is what Jesus did. And then he went to that cross. And do you remember whenever they went to arrest him and he says, "I am," every one of those soldiers fell down. And Pilate has the audacity to say, "Do you know the power that I have to release you?" And Jesus says, "You've only got the power that I give you." And he could have called down 10,000 angels. You ever thought about the power of the angels? If you go back to in the Old Testament, there was a time when the Assyrian army had come down and they had surrounded Jerusalem. And the king of Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, had written a letter and sent it to the king of Judah and said, "If you don't surrender, we're going to kill you." And so the king of Judah prayed all night long, put that letter out before the Lord and prayed all night long. And when he wakes up the next morning, one angel comes down and kills 185,000 of the other soldiers. Think about the power of God. But yet, it was the power of his love that brought Jesus to this earth. And that same power that put Jesus upon the cross and put him through all the suffering and put him through the wrath of God lives in the children of God. And as we see here tonight, as we look at 1 Corinthians chapter 13, I want us to see the three attributes about love that is so important for us as a child of God. The first thing that we see here that Paul brings out to this church at Corinth is without love, you're powerless. Now, when you think about Corinth, a little background on Corinth. Corinth is, Tim Keller said, Corinth was a lot like New York City. Nobody's from New York City, and nobody was from Corinth. Corinth was a place that had been destroyed centuries before the town that Paul is writing to, but it was a very good place to port and trade. So the ships from all over the world would come and land there at Corinth, and when you have all those ports and all that trade, what comes? A lot of money and a lot of culture. And so people went to Corinth. The people who lived in Corinth, they went there to make it. They went there to be the tradesmen. They went to be on Wall Street. They went there to be in the theater. They went there to be the poets. They went there to be the singers. They went there to be something. And I'm sure that there are people in New York City that can't sing and can't act. But most people that go to New York City are trying to make it as a singer, or they're trying to make it as an actor, or they're trying to make it in some large trade. And everybody that went to Corinth was very, very talented, very smart, very educated, very cultured. And as you read this letter that Paul is writing to this church, there's a lot of times they think they've got it all figured out. They're a very gifted group of people. But as we see here, without love, you're powerless. In the world that we live in today, there are many people that have all kinds of abilities. There are many people that have all kinds of talents. They do all kinds of things. They even do great acts of kindness. You can go around the world today and you'll find people that are feeding the hungry. You will find people that are putting clothes on those that don't have the ability to clothe themselves. You have people going to these storms and tornadoes and tsunamis, and they are helping people rebuild and restructure and do all these things, but they have no relationship with God. And even, I would dare to say that there are churches being led by very talented people that don't have the love of God. They have all kinds of talents, they have all kinds of abilities, they have all kinds of gifts, but they don't have the love of God, and I would dare to say they don't know God. Would that be too far-fetched to say so? And everybody's going to say, well, you can't be judgmental. I'm not trying to be judgmental. I'm trying to just speak the truth. If you look at the people that were following Jesus, there was one time when Jesus sent his disciples out. There were 70 of them that he sent out 2 by 2 to go to the different towns, and he gave them the ability to cast out demons, to heal the blind, to straighten those people that would have had a drawn up limb of either an arm or a leg. He sent them out to cast out demons. They were doing all kinds of these things. You know who was among them? Judas. And Jesus said he's the devil. He says, have I not chose 12 and one of you not of me? And every one of those disciples that were there with Jesus in that last few hours were going, is it me? Is it me? And none of them looked at Judas and thought, there's something different about Judas. He's not of us. Judas had all the abilities and the talents as the rest of them, but he didn't have love. And this church right here in Corinth, it's probably fair to say that this church here in Corinth is probably thriving numerically. They've got talent. They've got abilities. I bet you, Mike, they've got somebody that's leading the worship there and someone that's playing the instruments there. They've probably got an orchestra. And they're probably on Friday night playing down at the local restaurant down there, and everybody's coming down to watch them. And they're drawing people left and right. But they don't have any love. And what we find is Paul is telling them it's nothing. Though you speak with the tongues of angels, you're just a bunch of gongs. Anybody ever watch Andy Griffin? And Barney's trying to be a part of the band, and they gave him cymbals because Barney can't play anything. And Barney just always just banging those cymbals. It makes no sense whatsoever. They finally have to take the cymbals away from him because he's just making noise. And if you don't have love and you have all kinds of ability, you're just making noise. You see, there's people here that they had all kinds of wisdom and understanding and all kinds of faith, and they're doing all kinds of these works that they have out there, but they're nothing. And who are they nothing to? God. There's something big to the people of Corinth. There's something big to the people around there. They're amazed by the abilities that they have, but to God they're nothing because they're not bringing people to God. They're not worshiping God. And a lot of times what you find is the talented and the most ability, people with the most ability, everything's focused upon them, and the show's about them, and the songs are about them, the work is about them, and what is the problem in the church here in Corinth? It's all about me. God has given them abilities, and they're saying, my ability is more important than yours. I can speak in tongues, so therefore I can reach more people than you can. Or I've got wisdom of prophecy, and whenever I say it's coming true. Paul says, it's all useless if you don't love. It's all useless. Doesn't matter how great of an orator that you are, if you don't love, it's powerless and it has no ability. But we find that love is powerful. Love is powerful. Even think about this. There's been a lot of times you go, and I found, and I hate to say it this way, but some of the most biblically correct people that I have ever met are some of the most grumpy and mean people I've ever met. Do you think they have a ministry? They can chew you up, and some of the people that I've had conversations with would chew me up and spit me out over the Bible. And they'd be right. And I probably needed to be chewed up and spit out, but they didn't have any love. And if I hadn't already had a love for God, I probably would have never gone back to that church. Can you see what the problem is? When people come in and maybe they don't use the right verbiage or they don't use the right whatever, and people chew them out, a lost person or a person that's just now coming to Christ, they don't want to be a part of that. And what does it do? It's powerless, but love is powerful. It's full of power. Love gives you the ability to make a difference. Think about this, as Paul, as he's writing here, he starts out with all the things that love is not. And if you have all these things, but you don't have love, you're useless. But then he starts telling us what love is. Love suffereth long. Charity suffereth long. What does that mean? It means when you love somebody, you put up with a lot of stuff. Got kids? You understand. When you love somebody, you put up with a lot of stuff. Now, sometimes I don't feel like I'm very long-suffering with my kids until I'm around some of the other neighborhood kids, and I'm thinking, well, I am doing a lot better with mine. Because I will tell them to get out of my yard and go home. I don't care where you're going, just get on. Get out of here. Why? Because I don't love them as much as I do my own. But the thing about love is it's powerful. It stands out in the world. And what should a church stand out for? A church should not stand out. I mean, there's nothing wrong with standing out for being doctrinally sound. Matter of fact, we should be doctrinally sound. But there's actually, when you think about it, there's two things that a church should stand out on, and it is the truth and love. And when you bring them together, you find a way to correct somebody in love instead of being harsh and bitter. You do it in love because you desire the best for that person. But as we see, love is powerful. And you see the examples. You think about this with the first church. Do you remember, as you read through the book of Acts, how the people perceived the first church? They basically said, they're a bunch of ignorant people. Most of the people in the first church were from Galilee. And it's like being from Arkansas. Anywhere you go, people go, oh, Arkansas. Did you know Jed Clampett? Or unfortunately, they'll ask me, oh, that's where Bill's from. I said, but Hillary is not. Anyhow. You have all these mentalities of they're just a bunch of hicks. In the first church, and in the Jewish time when Jesus was alive, all the educated people were in Jerusalem. If you were one of those scribes or you were one of those Pharisees, you were the top dog preacher. You were in the temple in Jerusalem. And all the peasants out in Galilee had the guy fresh out of seminary. Because those folks couldn't read and they couldn't write and they couldn't speak very well at all. And it's an interesting thing as you see that first church is made up of a bunch of people. Even when on the day of Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit comes down and baptizes the church, and they go out and they begin to preach, and people are hearing it in all their own languages, and the people go, how can this be? It's a bunch of hicks from Galilee. What made them stand out? The love. The love of God had come into their life, and it was going out into the world, and they were hearing the wonderful works of God, and they stood out to the rest of the world. Jesus' love has spilled over in their lives, and as you think about this, these are the people that for the next 4 or 5 decades, these are the people that changed the world. They preached the gospel. And if you would study a little bit about where they went down into Africa and they preached the gospel. They went into Europe and they preached the gospel. They went into India and those countries, the eastern countries, and they preached the gospel. And we can find the gospel and we can find Christianity as far as England by the 1st century. How is that? These ignorant people. These untalented people. What was the difference? They saw Jesus. They loved Jesus. And even as you think about the Gospels that we have, whenever you think about John, as he's writing the Gospel of John, the very first people to see Jesus are the most unlikely people of that time. The Jews did not consider women anybody that was supposed to be or reliable for their testimonies, and neither did the Romans. But who's the first person to say he's alive? Beside the angels, it was Mary and the women. The love of God was in their lives, and it changed the world. And as we see here, it deals with us. It makes us to deal with people a lot different. We're not just a bunch of hard-hearted people. Love is powerful. In fact, as you study a little bit of history, John the Revelator, John who wrote the Gospel of John, John who wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, he lived a long time. He's the only one that they didn't kill. And one of the reasons that they didn't kill him is because everybody loved John. Even the lost world loved John. Why is that? Because the love of God was there. When you think about this, I've always heard that you can tell somebody's character by what they do when nobody's looking. You can also tell somebody's character when they're in a bind, what comes out. You know, the Old Testament talks about a lot of times the nation of Israel being pressed and uses the analogy of the great press. That first church, they were pressed. They were pressed by the Romans. Nero was trying to kill them all. The Jews were trying to kill them. They stoned Stephen. They cut James' head off. They crucified Peter, and they beheaded Paul. And we don't know exactly what all they did to the rest of them. But the harder that they pressed on them, you know what come out? The love of God. And it just dawned on me, the love of God's pretty sticky. Have you ever thought about Paul before he was a Christian? You ever thought about how that when Jesus appears to him on the road to Damascus, he says, it's hard for you to kick against the prick. Saul has been killing Christians. And there's one guy that he wasn't responsible for throwing the stones at him, but Stephen, one of the deacons that was out there preaching the gospel to those people, Saul was right there holding the coats while the rest of them were throwing the rocks at him, and the love of God spilled out of Stephen, and it stuck on Paul, and he couldn't shake it. I mean, think about this. What was Stephen's greatest desire? Is that the love of God would get into the hearts of those people, and it would change them. And you think about when he was poured out, the love of God poured out of him and it stuck on Paul. I bet you that whenever the day that Saul says, I believe in Jesus, that Stephen was in heaven praising God. Why? Because the greatest desire of each and every child of God is not to be alive longer. It's not to live the longest. It's not to have the most. It is for everybody that we know to come to know Jesus. The last thing that we see about the attribute of God is love is eternal. Paul says, all these great gifts you guys have, they're going to fade away. There's a lot of debate over this, and a lot of people don't like it. But when the Bible was finished, a lot of those gifts that they had, they went away. In fact, a lot of the things, by the time Paul is writing and towards the end of Paul's life, Paul doesn't use as many of those gifts. He didn't heal as many people. It seems like there was a fading away of all those gifts, and he's doing more of loving people and just preaching the truth. In the beginning, the church, they needed those miracles. They needed those gifts so the people could see the power of God in there. But the greatest gift that we have that changes the world is the love of God. And the love of God living in us. You see, as we look at what's going on, Paul is addressing things here at this church. All the talented people are going to fail sometime. All the wise people are going to come to an end. Have you ever thought and looked back at growing up in agriculture, going to ag school, so many of the things that I remember my dad doing and my grandfather doing, whenever I got into college, they said, that's all wrong. You don't break the soil anymore. And they broke the ground every time they turned around. They were breaking the ground, and they said, you're leaching the soil. You're leaching it out. But then you go back in the time when they were breaking the ground, that was revolutionary. You take man's wisdom and give them a few years, and they're going to be on, that wasn't any good. And every once in a while, we look up and we get something right. But our wisdom, it just seems to go from one generation to the next generation. The next generation says that didn't work. But even in the Bible, these people that have all these wisdoms and all these things, and these abilities, he's saying it's all going to fade away. You think about the ability to speak in a different language and all these different abilities. I would love to be able to speak in a different language and not have to study it. I took Greek and I took Hebrew, and I didn't like either one. I had to learn how to speak English before I could do those two. So I would love to be able to just go speak to somebody in their own language. When we think about this, when you get to heaven, what language will they speak? I don't want you to give me an answer. Because I'll hear people say, well, it had to be Hebrew. Well, it had to be this. It was probably whatever God spoke to Adam. But you know what's going to happen when we get to heaven? There are going to be people from every nation and every tribe and every kindred and every tongue are going to be in heaven. And what are they going to be doing? Worshiping God. And there will be, you think about this, why did God split up the languages in the first place? Because of the hard-heartedness of man. But when we get to heaven, the hard heart will be destroyed. We're going to have that new heart and a new life. So we don't need languages in heaven. What else are you going to need in heaven? You're going to need the ability to heal? Nobody's sick in heaven. They're already healed. Are you going to need the ability to teach in heaven? No, because the teacher's there. Besides that, we're going to be a lot smarter there because we won't have to deal with our own foolish thoughts. Are you going to need faith in heaven? You're going to be looking at it. What gift is going to be in heaven? Love. What gift gives us the ability to get to heaven? Love. And as we see here, all these things are going to come to an end. And just in case any of you had 1 Corinthians chapter 13 for your wedding verses, let me let you know something. This is not a beautiful picture. It's Paul getting on to this church because they're messing up. You need love. Love's powerful, but it never ends. Love never ends. The sad thing about a lot of these churches and a lot of these men and women who are leading these churches and they don't have the love of God in them, we see it. And you know what happens? Their pride, their arrogance overcomes. They get caught up in some kind of a scheme and some kind of a scandal, and we get to see who they belong to. God's going to reveal who you are and who you're not. And there was one time I remember I was talking to one of my preacher friends, and he's one of them guys that could meet an elephant and they'd be best friends for the rest of their life. He's just charismatic guy, and everywhere he goes, he knows everybody's name. He knows where they're from. My dad had that ability. Could go into a building, walk in there, know everybody, talk to everybody, figure out where they're from, and he knew somebody that they knew. Like, Dad, you've never even been to China. How do you know somebody there? And I was talking to that one preacher, and I said, man, I wish I had that ability. He said, no, you don't. God gives you what you need. Because I'm always thinking, man, if I had that, man, we could really do something. Man, if I had this ability, man, we could really do something. Last night I was watching Chet Atkins and Jerry Reed play guitar, and I was thinking, man, if I could play like that. But you know what we need? What do we need to serve God? Love. Because nobody cares about, if I were to go down the street and ask anybody if they knew who Jerry Reed or Chet Atkins was, nobody would know. Unless I said Snowman. Anybody know Snowman? Fred. They would know who that. Most of them would know. Well, I don't know if they would or not either. Yeah, I'm really getting old, brother. I'm getting there where I'm like, these kids they don't know it. But when you start coming to it, I don't need their abilities. When people are hurting and people are lost, you know what they need? To be loved. They don't need to know how smart you are. They don't even care what answers you got. Just love them. Have you ever thought about this? When you love somebody, you're looking for a way to help them. When you love someone and you're around that person and you see, man, they're tired. You call them up and say, hey, why don't you bring the kids over? We'll feed them supper. We'll play games with them. You go get your nails done. Go do something. Go do something. You know what they know? You love them enough to have looked at their needs and you say, I think I can help. How much talent do you have for that? When you got someone that's hurting, they've lost a loved one, I don't always have the words. I want you to know that. But you just sit there and you hand them a tissue. Read a scripture. Put your arm around them, give them a hug. Take them something to eat. How much Bible do they know that you know? They don't care. They just know you love. You see, if we're going to do something for God, it's like I was at a conference the other day down in Texas, and they were the class I went to was Small Church, Big Impact. And they were talking about, man, if we had this, this, and this. These people, they always go down to the big church where they have all this. And finally I said, you know what? People that don't go to church don't know that the big church has this. People that don't have Jesus don't know what the big church does. And if we'll love them and bring them to Jesus and show them how much Jesus loves them without trying to condemn them and chastise them and trying to change them, you can change the world and they're still going to hell. But if you love them, don't worry about what the big church has. Don't worry about the other people's talents. Love is powerful. And it will help you get through some horrible times, and it will help them get through some horrible times. See, love makes us stand out. Especially in this world today where there is no love. I don't care which side of the political party that you are on, they don't love. And you take one step this way, and that own party will hate you. I don't care what you've done or what you identify in. You will be hated by those people at some point. But love. We need to learn to love people that don't think like us, don't act like us, don't do like us. Just love them because Jesus does. You want revival? Ask God to help you with your love. You want to change your community? You want to change the neighborhood? You got to first start with that love inside of us. So that when they press on us, that Kurt doesn't come out. But when they press on me, Jesus comes out. This time I'm going to have a verse of invitation. I'm going to ask everyone to stand. If you have any issue in your heart, in your life, and love is a challenge for you, you're not the first. Peter had that problem. John had that problem. James had that problem. Everybody except for Jesus had that problem. But Jesus was able to overcome all of it. And He can overcome your lack of love too.